stop referring to white terrorists as lone wolves or guys who are just having a bad day. They're terrorists. If a Muslim man walked into a store and shot 8 people and targeted them because of their skin color, we would automatically assume that they were a terrorist. But a 21-year-old white kid decides to take the lives of 8 Asian women because of the fact that they were Asian. And what do we say? He was having a bad day. Not only is the rising in violence against Asian Americans fucking disgusting, but now we have the audacity to just make excuses and say that people like this are just having a bad day. The Las Vegas shooting was the largest mass shooting in the United States history, and not a single news story called him a terrorist. When is this double standard going to end where white men are held accountable for their actions and called what they are? I'm tired of reading the headline of an article reading, "Lone Wolf shoots up school." They're not a lone wolf. They're a fucking terrorist. And most of all, I'm so deeply sorry for the people who are recently affected by the rise in hate.
Zionists want you to believe that because Jewish people are descendants of an ancient tribe that used to live in Palestine 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, that they, the Zionists that is, are permitted to take Palestine as they did, expel Palestinians, destroy their homes, their towns, and their villages, steal their property, and establish a state for Jewish people exclusively who are willing to accept this racism and violence. Then they want you to also believe that any Palestinian who stands up against this and resists is a terrorist, and they can kill them, they can incarcerate and torture and so forth. Zionists also want you to believe that, or want you to believe, that if you stand with Palestinians, then you are anti-Semitic and racist, which of course is absurd. So, when we say free Palestine, we mean to free Palestine from the apartheid state of Israel so that everyone can live in peace. The way to do that is through boycott, divestment, and sanctions, BDS.
Let's talk about racism. So you probably look at a guy like me and say, "You're the whitest white man in America. You don't know anything about racism." And I'd say, "You're absolutely right. I don't know anything about racism. And I wish more people who look like me would just acknowledge that. It's one thing to experience racism vicariously. It's another thing to live it on a daily basis. I have a very good friend. We graduated law school together, and we ended up getting our first jobs out of law school at the same big downtown DC law firm. On paper, we were the same person, but in reality, he was black and I was white. And every night when we worked late, we had to leave together because if he left alone, he'd stand on the street and no cabs would pick him up. So I'd go with him, and I'd make sure he got the first cab that stopped. It was wrong that my friend had to deal with that kind of a prejudicial burden on a daily basis. He'd say that was one of the easier issues to deal with as a black man in America, but it was wrong. And you know what? As a white man, I've never had to experience that. So white people, let's stop pretending. We don't understand racism.
Every single day. This is the mentality. This is the mentality I saw when I was in Palestine of the Israelis, and it's what you can see from them. This is the sort of society. It's an apartheid society. It's a racist society. In my opinion, it's within the occupied territories. It's more full-on, but within Israel itself, within 1948, it's still the same way. It's still racist. It's still systemic. There's still laws passed that are racist. On the regular, there's I think it's 66 as of now laws passed through the Knesset, and maybe more that are passed through the Knesset, which are that strictly violate against Arab Palestinians' rights. I mean, even Ethiopian children are transported hours away because, you know, the white kids, the white Jews, don't want to have them in their school. This is the sort of thing that happens. It's like Jim Crow.
They are the least empowered population in the country and the most vulnerable.
Go back to Sudan. Don't forget.
Government, the ruling party, and other parties campaigned on they will take a strong stance. They will prevent more Africans from coming into the country. It's just across the board, you know, from Kadima on the left to Likud, Shas, to pretty much all the center and right-wing Israeli parties vilified African people, and 52% of Jewish Israelis agreed with a member of Knesset's characterization of African asylum seekers as a cancer in the country. If you can think, essentially cancer is the #1 killer of people in at least the developed world, in the Western world, and including in Israel.
Including top military commander during the war, General Mattiyahu Peled, who was quoted in Haaretz admitting the thesis that the danger of genocide was hanging over us in June 1967 and that Israel was fighting for its physical existence is only a bluff. The colonial superpower charged at lightning speed, showering the land with napalm. In less than a week, close to 40,000 Arabs were killed, many of them civilians in crowded cities that were firebombed and overrun by Israeli tanks. By contrast, under 800 Israeli soldiers were killed, along with 20 civilians. At the end of those 6 days, a new map emerged, closer to the greater Israel that the Zionists had always dreamed about. They conquered the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt, the Golan Heights of Syria, and the rest of Palestine. Another 300,000 Palestinians were made refugees during that short time. Many of them had already been made refugees once before, during the Nakba. While they had to ultimately return